Okay, so this is a PowerPoint slideshow primarily about interpretations of the Golden Ass, although this first slide is kind of outside of that. Just wanted to point out some of the intrusions of cultural context that you can find in the novel. So the last PowerPoint was about the cultural context of the Roman Empire, North Africa, and so on. And so, a couple of aspects of that cultural context kind of obviously intrude repeatedly in the Golden Ass. So I wanted to point out some examples of that. And so we talked about rhetoric and oratory, how Apuleius was considered a great orator and an expert in rhetoric, and there's a lot of rhetoric and oratory in the novel. So for example, just to name a couple, if you look at page 55, it might go on to the next page, I forget, but anyway, the narrator delivers this elaborate, almost like an essay on the beauty of women's hair. It's very rhetorical, action just comes to a halt and he delivers this speech. Well, it's not a speech, I don't think, it's narration. Or if you look at pages 72 to 76, when the city is playing this prank on Lucius and has him convinced that he's murdered some young men. Well, there's a lot of speechifying in that whole scene. He's brought to the Senate or Forum, sort of to be put on trial, and his accuser makes an elaborate speech, and then Lucius delivers an elaborate speech in his own defense, and then a magistrate makes a brief speech. The supposed victim's supposed mother makes a brief speech, and so on. So it's, just loaded with rhetoric and oration. That happens all through the whole novel. I don't want to point out all the examples, but if you think about it and look at other sections of the book, or if you're still reading it, if you notice, there's lots of that. Religion. So we talked about the overlapping spheres of religion, the sort of household domestic religion, the local shrine-based religion, and the Hellenic Roman, Greek-Roman, Greco-Roman religion, the gods that we're familiar with, and the temples that they would have. And so, again, it's easy to find examples of religion, this kind of religion intruding in the book. So on pages 51 and 52, Lucius arrives at Birana's house, and it resembles a temple. There are columns, there's statues of Hellenic goddesses, or at least one, and of Hellenic mythical figures. It's her house, but it's a very elaborate temple-like setting. On pages 57 through 59, a little different aspect of religion, that of divination, of divining and finding meaning in physical objects and so on. Pamphile, who is the hostess of where Lucius is staying, she looks at the candle and makes a little prediction. And this launches a discussion between Milo and Lucius about fortune tellers, and Milo tells a story. They both talk about Diophanes, this fortune teller. On pages 67 and 68, toward the end of Telephron's story, the corpse that Telephron was supposed to guard is lying in public, and they want the testimony of this corpse as to what really happened. And so this man says, here's Zatlas the Egyptian. He'll bring the corpse to life. And he does. Zatlas the Egyptian, this foreign freelance ritual expert. It's like, oh, here's this ritual expert. He's freelancing. He's from Egypt. He's a foreigner. He can come right in here and do some magic and some divination. On page 85, there's a brief description of a shrine rather than a temple, one of these more local, smaller shrines. And it is a shrine to Epona, who was a goddess of fertility that actually emerged from Celtic culture in the British Isles, but had become popular throughout the empire. So that's an interesting bit of religious context. And again, there are lots of other examples of religion intruding in religious content in the book. And of course, the final book, the final chapter, is very religious and tells of Lucius's conversion to a non-Hellenic religion, to the cult of Isis. So on to talk about literary interpretation of the Golden Ass. Some broad interpretations, just kind of people's readings of the book as a whole, I want to touch upon. And so many writers have pointed out that the alternate title of the Golden Ass is the Metamorphoses, and it's not only the story of Lucius being transformed into a donkey and back to a man, that those metamorphoses, but it's a whole series of metamorphoses by all kinds of people. Nothing is as it seems, nothing stays the same. There are metamorphoses of species, of class, of gender. Repeatedly, there are reversals of fortune. Someone's down on their luck and suddenly things turn around, or they're doing great and suddenly their life is ruined. Metamorphoses. So just reading the novel as a book about metamorphoses. I can't remember her first name, and I don't have the book with me, but I think her name is Elizabeth. Anyway, her last name is Duty, and she wrote a really great book called The True Story of the Novel, about how the novel didn't really arise out of Europe, but came out of classical antiquity and so on and so forth. And so in her view, she talks about the Golden Ass in general, and in her view, it's very phallic. I guess maybe this is a Freudian interpretation, I don't know. But anyway, Duty says that the ass, meaning the donkey, is a symbol of base human desire and, quote, a preeminently phallic animal. She says the main character, quote, ironically represents and is the penis. And she says also, quoting, society counts the penis lethal and aggressive, base and destructive. In other words, the society of the Roman Empire, the society depicted in the novel, counts the penis lethal and aggressive, base and destructive. And she points out there's an episode where someone wants to castrate Lucius when he's a donkey because it will make him more gentle. Also, she points out that the ass's penis is an instrument of the law in Corinth that's going to be used to punish a woman. Although that doesn't come about because Lucius escapes, right? She says Lucius inhabits a world, quote, comically caught up in repetitive libidinousness. She says Lucius transferred his libidinous desire to the wish to become a bird, to fly, to rise above the human condition, whereas he is destined to sink below it. So sort of a sexual reading of the book. Drake, and later we're going to look at part of what Drake says about one of the episodes in the novel, and I'll give you his full name there, I think. But for Drake, the book dramatizes the conflict between the Egyptian Trinity, which would be Isis, Osiris, and Horus, versus Set. Set was the Egyptian god of darkness, confusion, evil, and drunkenness. And so Drake says that Set, this god of darkness, dominates the first 10 books, but the 11th book tells of Isis's victory, Isis being a member of the Egyptian Trinity. So he reads it as sort of an allegory of this victory of the Egyptian Trinity over the Egyptian god of darkness, Set. Okay, and so what I want to do next is just quickly summarize for you, as quick as I can, 3 interpretations of specific aspects of the novel. And so these are based on articles that I've found, and I've given you the title and author's name. if you need more information, if you want to find these yourselves, let me know, but they're not difficult to find with that information. And so one author has written about witchcraft and witches in The Golden Ass, and he focuses on Pamphile and Mero and Panthea. And he says that there are Lamiae. These characters are Lamiae. So what does that mean, Lamiae? Well, Lamia was a minor figure in Hellenic mythology. She was a Libyan princess seduced by Zeus, typical Zeus behavior. She bore Zeus some children. Zeus's wife Hera killed the children out of jealousy. And then Lamia turned ugly with grief and anger and devoted her the rest of her existence to devouring children. So she's sort of a terrifying figure. Ugly, devours children, and she sort of developed, this author says, into a folk figure that was used to threaten children, kind of like the boogeyman or Baba Yaga or whatever, you know. Lamia will get you if you don't behave. In some literature, she was depicted as a seductive, vampire-like creature who preys on handsome young men, according to Lineweber. And so, like I said, he looks at Mero, Panthea, and Pamphile as being Lamiae. So that's sort of the plural of Lamia. They're Lamiae figures. So Mero is the one at the beginning of the book who has seduced Socrates and bursts in and drains all his blood into a bottle and curses him. And Panthea is just her companion when she attacks Socrates. And so Lineweber argues that Mero and Panthea are Lamiae figures. His evidence is that at one point Apuleius actually used the term Lamiae. You know, in the original Latin, he used the term Lamiae, the plural of Lamia. Although he says that was an isolated instance, that elsewhere he just called Mero and Panthea witches or sorceresses. He points out that Mero seems to have bewitched Socrates. She's described as old, but he sort of inexplicably has found her attractive. He strikes his friend as being drained of energy, as if he's, you know, someone's been sucking his blood. And of course, when she and Panthea attack at the inn, they drain his blood completely. And then, but of course, he's not dead until he takes a drink from a stream. And in some later vampire folklore, vampires couldn't cross running water. So he says all that reflects an association or identification of those women as Lamiae. And then Pamphile, I can't quite decide how to say her name, but anyway, Pamphile, he says, is also a Lamia, a vampire-like Lamia. And he points out that Fotis, the servant girl, and Birana both warn Lucius that she pursues young men. She's associated with the witches of Thessaly. There's a lot of discussion of magic and witches in the city of Thessaly. And from Telephron's tale, we know that they rob graves, they take pieces of dead flesh off of corpses, and I think Lineweber assumes that they consume that dead flesh. Also, she's a shape shifter. She turns into an owl, and obviously has an ointment that can turn someone into a donkey. And so she's a shapeshifter, like later European vampires often were depicted as being able to change into bats. Werewolves, of course, are shapeshifters. So his overall thesis is that, quote, the hags in the Golden Ass borrow from the legendary Lamiae. This gave them their most fearsome and destructive quality. Hence, in many ways, they more resemble modern European folk conceptions of the vampire. Hence, in many ways, their power and persona surpassed mere magic or spells, and they were overtly linked with cannibalism and the harvesting of human blood. And he says, in many ways, this novel is prototypical, a forerunner of the modern literary genre of horror. Its eerie and macabre qualities predate by centuries similar themes found in Shakespeare, Poe, Bram Stoker, and others. That's kind of cool. Okay, so Telefron's story has been interpreted by Gertrude C. Drake. There's her name. I'll tell you about this and then one more. Telefron's story. So Telefron's the one who's hired to guard the corpse and so on. And so her interpretation is that Telefron is this Egyptian figure Ka who is depicted as a double or a doppelganger and also as a guardian. So that makes sense, right? Because there's two Telefrons. He's a guardian of the corpse. Also, as evidence, she points out that he calls himself a man of iron, and iron was the metal associated with Set. So Ka is associated with Set. He requests wine, food, and a lamp, and Set is the god of drunkenness and gluttony. The widow calls him a fool, and Set was the divine trickster and buffoon. He insults, Telefron insults the widow in the morning and gets a beating, which Drake says recalls the ritual beating of an ass, which was an animal sacred to Set. During Egyptian holy festivals, there would be this ritual beating of an ass. She argues that the uncle is depicted as an agent of Set, and for evidence, she points out that he invokes items sacred in Egyptian religion, the planets, the night, the river Nile. Yeah, okay. And then Zachlas, that freelance Egyptian ritual diviner guy, she says represents Set himself. And for evidence, she says, well, instead of praying over the deceased to speed his journey to the afterlife, he threatens to awaken the corpse. He opens the dead man's mouth to place herbs inside it, and she explains that priests would ritually open corpses' mouths in the tomb to allow them to verbally testify their righteousness before Osiris. And she says the first syllable of Zachlas, Zach, suggests Set, and she has some complex linguistic evidence for that I don't really feel like getting into. And then she says the widow, the wife of the deceased, is an innocent Isis figure, or symbolic of Isis. As evidence, she points out that the widow only gave Telefron a lamp, which is a symbol of Isis's son Horus. Telefron's first sight of her, of the widow, she's in mourning. She throws her hair back and reveals her beauty. And Drake says that Isis hides in her hair her gloriousness eclipsed because of her grief for Osiris. So the image of her hiding behind her hair in mourning, she thinks is significant. She lies over her spouse's body the morning after Telefron guards it, which recalls Isis lying over Osiris's corpse to bring back his phallic potency. Okay, so that's an interpretation of that episode. One more. Sinister cheese. Sinister cheese. The cheese is sinister in the golden ass. And so this, I'm just summarizing the highlights of an article for you. There's the title and author's name, and the thesis is essentially that Apuleius makes an enigmatic connection of cheese with supernatural or miraculous events in his novel. And so in Aristomenes' tale, cheese makes Socrates thirsty and leads to his death. Right, his blood has been drained, the wound has been stopped up with a sponge or something. He eats some cheese, he gets thirsty, he goes over to the stream and drinks from it, and dies. Cheese is sinister. In book 8, a goat herd, upon being asked if he has milk and cheese, gives the party an ambiguous warning and runs away. And then one of the members of the party is led away by an old man who turns into a dragon. If you remember that story in Book 8, it starts with this reference to cheese. In Book 9, there's this story in which the old father commits suicide with a knife. And guess what he has just done with the knife? He has used it to cut a piece of cheese. Okay, cheese is very sinister. Also, Aristomenes, who tells the tale of Socrates' demise, is a cheese merchant. And so this author explains that in Roman culture, cheese was associated with plotting and contrivances. And gives the example of weaving in contemporary times as being associated with similar things. Weaving a plot and weaving a web. Well, cheese had a similar association with plotting and contrivances in Roman culture. He says that Aristomenes calls his merchandise caponarum merces. So that's Lucius Apuleius's Latin term. And the author says that means either merchandise for inns or merchandise for women who run inns. Merchandise for women who run inns. A capona is a woman who runs an inn. Miro, the witch who seduces Socrates and drains his blood, is referred to as a capona. And so there's this whole association of cheese with sinister things in Roman culture and in the book here and there in different episodes. And the author says it goes back as far as the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, right, in which Circe brews a potion of various ingredients, including cheese. So you can see it in other works of literature. Okay, so that's just a taste of some interpretations of the novel and of different aspects and different episodes in the novel. Over and out.